The Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return.
We appreciate you listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. We don't do this podcast because we are former addicts. We don't do this podcast because we have loved ones who have suffered from addiction. We do this podcast because we feel that addiction is one of the biggest problems facing the world today, and that no matter who you are, no matter your religion, no matter your income status, no matter your race, no matter anything about you, addiction affects you. This podcast is a free resource for anybody looking for help with addiction. If you would like to help us in our fight against addiction, go to www.patreon.com/theaddictionpodcast273. That's www.patreon.com/theaddictionpodcast273. And make a donation of whatever amount you would like. Thank you for supporting us. Hello, and welcome to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. My name is Joni Siegel, and I'm the host for this podcast. Today's episode is episode number 215. When a person is addicted to drugs and or alcohol, the myriad of choices of treatment can be overwhelming. Narconon Ojai is a residential treatment facility that handles the physical, mental, and spiritual aspects of addiction with a proven, evidence-based, holistic, completely drug-free, step-by-step program that frees those trapped by addiction. For more information, call 1-866-231-5924. Today we have an episode with a gentleman that we've interviewed before on the podcast, but he always has a lot of really good insight to give our listeners. His name is Bobby Newman. And after going from a strong moral upbringing in Southern California to a drug-related downfall that had him facing federal prison, he understands how those addicted feel and think. That's what enables him to cut through the resistance and manipulative tactics of an addicted person and help them choose life and recovery. He is a renowned interventionist. He has an over 90% success rate with those that he goes to intervene with. You know, you've heard me say it if you've listened to this podcast and you've listened to our middle blurb, if you will, that sometimes just getting someone into treatment is the absolute hardest thing. So that's what Bobby addresses. He's successful at it. Let's talk to interventionist Bobby Newman. Bobby Newman, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I know we've had you on a couple times before, but I always think that your story and what you do is so impactful to everyone that listens. So thank you.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
Awesome. So because we probably have people for whom perhaps this is the first episode they're listening to, and maybe they haven't heard our other interviews with you, take us back and tell us about your drug history, how you got started on drugs and how that progressed.
Okay. Well, I grew up in a small town in southern Oklahoma, and, we had a different view. I mean, I was always told by my parents, they did the best they could at the time, and you do drugs. I mean, back in the early 70s, late 60s, there was LSD was a big thing, and there was some kids that got involved with that. And, it was easy to point those kids out and go, if you do drugs, that's what you're going to end up like. And, but then there was a confusing message because it seemed to be somewhat okay that alcohol was okay. Mm-hmm. There were get-togethers at various functions, and, people would be drinking beer and things like that. So, we had the idea that alcohol was okay, but, still you need to be of age, but the other drugs were bad. So growing up, 14, 15 years old, started, we'd go on fishing trips or camping trips and, with the other guys my age, and somebody would sneak us some beer and we'd started out like that and swearing that you would never do drugs or smoke weed or anything like that. Well, then eventually that kind of led into when I got older in high school, I started, again, a small town, but we were very good at sports. And, in the sports in high school, what am I going to do now? I kind of got bored and, went to a party and somebody introduced, I'd broken up with a girlfriend and upset about that. Somebody said, hey, you should try this. And I'm like, hey, the alcohol always makes me feel terrible. I hung over the next day. I said, I'll try. I smoked some weed. So I started out smoking marijuana, and it wasn't like I didn't fall off the end of the earth. We ended up having fun, laughing a lot, giggling a lot. Then, that wasn't too bad. So I guess did it again. And then by the time it just became more and more of a habit. And then by the time I went to college, somebody introduced me. I thought, well, marijuana's not too bad. Actually now smoking marijuana regularly. And, somebody introduced me to amphetamines, and it was a pharmaceutical. And so then I got to where I was taking that part. I would go out. Party night was on college was on Thursday night. So I could go out and drink and take part of this. Some of this, it was a capsule, and I could take half of the capsule and stay out and drink and, come in late and then wake up the next morning and take the rest of the capsule, go to class, not be hungover. Oh, well, that's great. So then I started doing that on Friday night or Thursday night. Then it was Saturday night. Then it became more and more frequent. So it just gradually progressed from there because I didn't have that, effect of where when I was younger, seeing those other kids that had taken the LSD and really kind of going on trips and not coming back. I didn't have that. It was like, oh, this is not too bad. There's nobody, so I just gradually got worse until it was about 20 years later. I'm 35 years old and I'm in a lot of trouble. I'm heavily addicted to alcohol, marijuana, and amphetamines, methamphetamine, and I'm in a lot of legal trouble. So that's how it rolled out for me.
Right. What was the legal trouble? Can you say, or? Well,
I was a pretty rambunctious guy. I mean, I love playing sports, love contact sports, love basketball, that involvement. So, going out partying, I was always getting into something, and I had a lot of friends that used drugs that would set back. They were kind of like very like subdued. And I'm just not that guy. I'm going to create an effect of some sort and, it caused stir something up, and so I'd get in trouble. And then whether it be drinking and driving, and then but the last time that I got in trouble, which was basically the straw, I was working. I actually was a sheet metal worker, and I was running a crew. I had a shop that I was in charge of, and also had to make sure that all the materials were delivered to the job, which is on an Army base. So I'm driving out there to check on the job site, and I have possession of methamphetamine, a loaded firearm, and a bag of marijuana.
Just that? That's all? Oh, Bobby.
Yeah, I was just going to work. Oh. Yeah. So I get pulled over, and of course I get in a lot of trouble. So it's just funny, but I ended up getting a lot of trouble, and I was smart enough to actually negotiate my way out of that. I was looking at 2.5 years per charge, $100,000 per charge. And I was smart enough to walk into the federal courtroom and negotiate my own plea deal and negotiate that down to $2,500 and 2 weeks in jail, done on weekends without an attorney. And, and that would have cost me $20,000. I was also stupid enough to then continue to violate my probation. So that's where it kind of led to where now I was kind of like funneled down into like one more mess up and you're going to prison. The prosecutor told me that. So you'd think that would be enough to motivate me to not. But
not necessarily.
No, I actually showed up at my dad's house about 2 weeks after they sat me down and tried to get me to go to rehab at that moment. And when I got out of jail, they met me and they had a brochure and, took me to get something to eat, and brought the brochure out and said, we want you to go to rehab. And I had all the standard answers of no, I know what I need to do. I can do it on my own. I can stop hanging out with my friends. I just need to go to work every day. The whole standard answers that I've heard a gazillion times.
Famous last words.
Yeah. So then, yeah, exactly. Then about 2 weeks later, I'm basically belly crawling back to my dad's house. Not really, but it felt like that, and back
spiritually belly crawling. Sometimes the hardest thing about getting someone into recovery is getting them to agree to treatment. Bobby Newman, a certified drug counselor with 30 years experience and an over 85% success rate as an interventionist, has created a series of 12 videos that you can use right now to learn every step to get your loved one to agree to treatment. Call 866-989-4499 today and say the word podcast to get a 10% discount. Or go to newmaninterventions.com and type in the word podcast for a 10% discount. This service comes with a free 1-hour consultation with Bobby. We appreciate you listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. We don't do this podcast because we are former addicts. We don't do this podcast because we have loved ones who have suffered from addiction. We do this podcast because we feel that addiction is one of the biggest problems facing the world today, and that no matter who you are, no matter your religion, no matter your income status, no matter your race, no matter anything about you, addiction affects you. This podcast is a free resource for anybody looking for help with addiction. If you would like to help us in our fight against addiction, go to www.patreon.com/theaddictionpodcast273. That's www.patreon.com/theaddictionpodcast273. And make a donation of whatever amount you would like. Thank you for supporting us.
Crawling back to his house with a handout going, hey, I think I'm going to take you up with that offer. And my dad was just floored. He's like, he was there when the prosecutor told me that I was going to go, this is what's going to happen. And I said, I got a drug test I'm going to take tomorrow. I'm going to fail it. That would make my fourth time to violate probation. And I ended up violating. Well, I took the test the next day, but I immediately went into rehab. That was when, and the rehab was out of the jurisdiction that I was supposed to stay in. So I technically violated 5 times, but luckily my probation officer was great guy, very social guy, genuinely wanted to help people. And he said, and he'd worked with the rehab center before. So he said, yeah, and it was long-term. So it would serve the purposes of keeping me in not out continuing to break the law and, get me help at the same time. So it worked in the best interest of everybody for me to just go to rehab. And
now, what kind of rehab was that, Bobby?
I went to the Narconon program.
Oh, okay.
Did go to the Narconon program. And because for me, I didn't feel like that medications was an answer, and I just couldn't get into the group setting of a 12-step program. So I just thought this, and I was big on the vitamins and the sauna. And so that was what appealed to me.
Okay.
And my sister knew that. Actually,
okay.
She knew that because I had discussions with her about rehab before.
Interesting.
And
Okay. And when was that? When was it that you got clean?
That was August 26th of 2000 was the day I walked onto the property of Narconon. So it's been over almost 21 years.
Yep.
So.
Well, very well done on almost 21 years. I had a gentleman on the podcast and said he really didn't want to be heavily validated for being clean and sober. And I said, well, I'm going to do it anyway because I know it's not easy. So yeah. I'm going to tell you, very well done.
Thank you.
So what led you then into doing what you do today, interventions? How did you get into that?
Well, I became involved. One of the things that when I was on the program, a guy showed up, Bobby Wiggins showed up, and he actually was talking about doing drug prevention, drug education. And he gave a presentation to the student body at the center. And I wanted to do that. I decided right then, I said, I want to do that because my son was 8 years old at the time. I have 2 sons. One's 20. The one I'm talking about now is 29 now, but he was 8 years old at the time. And, I wanted to be able to, this information that I was learning was not, I had been to, it just wasn't out there. And I said, this could help kids choose not to do drugs. Because had I known this information, I probably wouldn't have made the bad decision. I don't know. I mean, I would be less likely to have made the bad decision.
You are listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information on the podcast, or to reach out if you have a story you would like to share with us, go to our Facebook page by the same name, or you can email us at theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com, or go to our website, theaddictionpodcast.com. And please remember to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a 5-star review. We appreciate you listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. We don't do this podcast because we are former addicts. We don't do this podcast because we have loved ones who have suffered from addiction. We do this podcast because we feel that addiction is one of the biggest problems facing the world today, and that no matter who you are, no matter your religion, no matter your income status, no matter your race, no matter anything about you, addiction affects you. This podcast is a free resource for anybody looking for help with addiction. If you would like to help us in our fight against addiction, go to www.patreon.com/theaddictionpodcast273. That's www.patreon.com/theaddictionpodcast273. And make a donation of whatever amount you would like. Thank you for supporting us. You know, it's interesting that you say that. While I'm not 100% familiar with the drug education that is part of Narconon, I'm familiar with the truth about drugs, and my thought has always been that if we can acknowledge that children are not stupid, and that if given the correct and truthful information, not just a dogmatic say no because I said so, but if they're given the actual information, they'll make better informed choices.
Right.
So it's interesting that you put it that way, because that's what I believe anyway.
I've actually got, that's the truth. I mean, the truth is the kids are pretty smart, and they're very smart, and we need to just give them the information, and that way the responsibility can be theirs. And whether, and it's because it's very confusing. I mean, even for me, I mean, not that people intentionally do it, but like, okay, so these drugs are bad, but this is okay, and people don't understand the consequences of the example that they set. And kids can actually then become informed and make their own decisions about what they want to do. So
that's right.
When I was doing drug education, I asked the kids, have you ever seen a drug addict? Yeah. I said, okay, what do they look like? Okay, well, they would tell you how they look, bad on the street, very malnourished and basically terrible. And I'd say, okay, what do you think they looked like when they were your age? So
wow.
Look around the room, because this is, they're like, I see.
Yeah, seriously. Wait a second. You mean they look like me and then they turned into that?
Do you think that when they were your age that they grew up thinking they were going to look, go look what they looked like? And do you think that, because most of the time they're going to say, I want to be a fireman, or I want to be a police officer, or I want to be, a doctor, or a law, those type of pilot, something of that sort, Yep. Because I remember asking myself when I graduated high school in the year 2000, where am I going to be? I'm 17 years old at the time. So where am I going to be in the year 2000? I want to be 35 years old. And so I had no idea I'd be looking at 7 years in the federal penitentiary and going to rehab. So
not kind of what you put on your list of your bucket list.
Yeah, that
doesn't get on there.
Right. So exactly. So to answer your question, I started out doing drug prevention, and then it led to other things. Got into where I was doing the aftercare. I was doing a lot of drug prevention, and I got some other people trained to do drug prevention and education. And then I got into doing aftercare with then I got the opportunity to, the opportunities that I've had in my life are miraculous. It truly is a miracle. But I got to set up the opportunity to set up a rehab facility, also be a medical detoxification liaison between the rehab center and medical detox centers and things like that. So, and then when I was I spent some time in Hawaii, and I got to where I was doing interventions out of Hawaii. So I was also involved with the admissions of getting somebody into the program, but also doing interventions. And so that's where I kind of led into where I do what I do now.
I have a question. Do you think, thank you for sharing that. Sorry. Do you think that the whole subject of interventions gets enough attention, or like gets enough attention, I guess you would say? Because to me, one of the most difficult things that an addict has to go through is making the decision that they're going to get help. And you don't hear about that many interventionists. At least I don't.
Well, right. The thing is like, matter of fact, I just talked to a family today, and they're very successful, professional people. But the brother told me, he said, we've been dealing with this for a few years now. And we just now decided to get a professional involved. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking to myself, and it goes for everybody, because everybody thinks that they can handle this, but it's kind of like going. And they don't see, well, some of the things that I go over with them, they say, oh, well, I've said that to him. I've done this, and I've done, and maybe they haven't done it in an organized fashion, such as an intervention. And it's a process that you go through. It's designed to produce certain results, and people can't see that. So there's many reasons why a person, and interventions, just to touch on, intervention is going to happen regardless, of some sort, whether it be legal or whether it be health or whether it be, there's going to be a consequence that's going to stop that behavior.
Very good point. And I think, for anybody listening who has a loved one who is addicted, you can either wait for the judge to intervene and send your loved one to prison, or you can wait until they overdose and almost die. That could be a form of intervention.
Right.
Or you could hire somebody like Bobby. And yes, I'm saying hire. He doesn't do it for free, but he's successful at it. And it's like, what's it worth to you to have your loved one actually get into treatment? Why wait? Why wait?
Right. Well, I tell you, even when my son was older, it's exactly. So, well, a lot of times the question is, well, he's not that bad. He's not going to have those things happening. I said, yeah, that's the reason we want to do it now.
Right.
We don't want it to get that bad.
Right.
You have no
You want to wait until he's homeless under the bridge and could potentially die or get arrested or has diseases and here's the thing, I'm going to just add this one in. I think a lot of people don't understand that drug use has long-term negative effects on the body. So if your child, here's a good thing you could use, if your child had cancer, would you wait until it got really bad before you got them treatment?
Right.
Or would you want to get them into treatment as quickly as possible?
That's right. That's exactly. And the thing with addiction is you have the problem is that I run into with families is that you can see the x-ray or you can see the test results that the doctor can provide if there's those type of maladies with physically. Addiction is invisible. You can't see it. So that's where
they know, Bobby. They know. I would know if my child was addicted. I just would. Yeah. There's indicators, and we've talked about that on the podcast before. Right. There's indicators.
Right. No, you're right. They're 100%. And that's the thing. The other thing is like you guys have been seeing. One of the questions a lot of times, I don't know how bad he is. I don't know what he's addicted to. I'm like, okay, well, let's just take the drug use away. What's he doing? Is he working? Is he being responsible? Is he, a lot of times they're stealing. They're doing all these things that you're talking about. The indicators are there. Yep. Take away the drugs. The behavior itself is not okay. And that's an indicator that something needs to change.
Right.
And they're like, oh, yeah, I guess you're right. So the signs have been there for a long time. You just have not been noticing them or chose to ignore them or something. So,
Yep.
It's like for me, I had rec in high school. We went to this drive-in down, at the next town over. like I said, small town in Oklahoma, and we'd come back and we had a flipped over and went almost the length of a football field on the roof of the car, through a fence and into a plowed field. Now, a plowed field is going to slow a car down quite a bit because of the dirt, and we went almost 100 yards upside down. That's how fast we were going. Did that have a big impact? I got a scolding from my parents, and not that, I mean, I'm not blaming my parents. I'm just saying it was like not, there was a series of things like that weren't taken that seriously.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Bobby, can you share any particularly standout stories, obviously not with names, of interventions that you've done? Because I think sometimes when you, like, even just talking about this family who's, they're an upscale family, upper middle class, and, aren't sure if it's bad enough or not sure why they need an intervention. But give us some stories of some things that you've encountered.
Well, there's many.
I know. You have to narrow it down. I want a few stories that
It's like, well, I can give you my own personal story. One is my son, when he started having trouble, I didn't have any evidence of him using drugs, but emotionally, I'm trying to handle this, and I do this for a living. This was about 14, 15 years ago. And I didn't have any evidence. He wasn't used necessarily. It wasn't a drug problem. It was just a behavior problem. But I was like trying to handle it, and I was emotionally beside myself. Thankfully, I have colleagues that were there going, hey, grabbing me and literally figuratively shaking me, going, hey, what do you tell all these other people? Oh, this is what I tell them. Well, that's what you need to do then. And I had to go to somebody else. I couldn't handle him. I did have the sense to say I've got to send my son to somebody else. If there's too much of an emotional connection and people make that mistake, they think they can handle it, and they can't.
I think very few. I think very few and far between. I think that there is too much emotional baggage that we have with our children and that we have with our parents, speaking from the kid's viewpoint. Yeah. And when the parent then all of a sudden goes, okay, now I'm not your mom, now I'm your interventionist, the kid goes, no, you're my mom and I don't have to listen to you. And that's a very good point. And I think that's another good reason why people should really consider, doing an intervention. Right. With someone, not doing an intervention on their own, but I mean, hiring someone to do an intervention.
Right. And the other thing too, and I do have a particular story I want to tell you about, but, people get so frustrated. There's this emotional roller coaster of getting angry at this behavior and this, and then you outburst, and then you feel guilty. So then it's this constant back and forth, and it does absolutely no good. And so we want to move forward. So it's a constant reaction to the person who's addicted. And a lot of times the families are letting the person who's addicted kind of run the show. And it has to be their decision to get help. But at the same time, we have to put ourselves in a position of control. And knowing how to do that is very key. And so we can move forward proactively and not be reacting to that person. I had a woman that she was from LA. Her daughter was from LA. But her daughter was in Tucson. Sent her to a rehab center near Tucson, and she left. She packed her bags and left. So she's on the streets of Tucson. So she's like, she doesn't know what to do. But at the same time, this girl, there's not a lot of what we call leverage to motivate this person, the girl, to get help. I said, I guess you could just let it go and see what happens. And so I don't want to do that. I said, okay, so this would be a means of you being positive over this situation. And if it doesn't turn out well, there's always a chance that it's not going to, but at least in your mind, you'll know that you've done everything you can to help your daughter. And you can walk away and hopefully walk away from this with knowing that you've done every possible thing. And lo and behold, we were able to fly out there. We met, and I was in Florida at the time, but anyway, I flew out there, met her. she flew from LA. And she looks at me and we met at the hotel. She said, "How are we going to do this?" I said, "I have no idea." Because this girl's on the streets of Tucson. We have no idea even where she's at.
Yeah.
But
first you have to find her.
Yeah, we had to find her. She was in text communication with her mother, and her mother could kind of track her where her phone was at. So we inadvertently got this girl off this. There's a place in Tucson called the Miracle Mile. And we went to start hunting around about places that we knew that her mom was supposed to bring her back. She has no idea that I'm there, the girl, addicted girl. But she was in communication. And after all day, I mean, there's a Miracle Mile in Tucson, and it's one of the worst street places I've ever seen. And I've been in some pretty hairy. I've been in Camden, New Jersey, and also in the streets of San Francisco. This is right up there. And we saw a gang fight. We saw, just all kinds of stuff. And finally, I started basically. I said, "Here's what we're going to do." Her and her mother were very close. This girl, but she was kind of running her mother around. And I just finally said, "Give me your phone." I started texting her. I said, "Okay, where do you want me to drop your stuff?" What do you mean? I said, I'm done. I'm done with this. I'm going home. I was texting as I was the mother. "What are you talking about? I'm just not ready yet." I said, "Well, I'm ready. I'm done. I'm done. I'm going home. I'm dropping your stuff off." And she said, "Well, no." And I forget exactly what she said, but I said, "All right, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave your stuff at the Tiki Motel, room 23, with Roxanne, because there is a person in room 23 at the Tiki Motel. We talked to her, and I think that she probably knew that she was there too. So she knew exactly that we were, and we're going to leave it with Roxanne, and you can pick your stuff up there. And a matter of fact, I'm having the rest of your stuff in my house mailed there." And the girl just came out of the woodwork. She's like, "Wait a minute." And we ended up getting her to get in an Uber and come to our hotel. And we did the intervention at the hotel. And the girl and I were on the way to the airport that night, But it was one of those things and this mother was a professional. She was a psychologist for the penal system over women's prisons in California. And she was like, "I never would have been able to do this." And I said, "Well, if I were you, I probably wouldn't have been able to either. It's too emotional." So
right. I think that makes that point again that, as parents, there's too much emotional baggage, and you need a third party like Bobby. And I'm not trying to say everybody needs to hire Bobby, although you probably should if you need an interventionist.
Yeah.
But you need someone like that who can be a little bit tough when you've basically been enabling your son, daughter, mom, or dad.
Right. Yeah. And, get some professional help, get some professional guidance, get somebody who's been there, and, you should feel comfortable and confident with their help. But yeah, it's too emotional. It's next to impossible. So.
Right. What, give me some more, give me another story. I want another story about a successful intervention that you did that sticks out in your mind.
Well, there's another one, is a girl that I went to in New York, and this was an impossible situation. And it was a single mom, a widow, and the girl was early 20s. She was with her boyfriend, who was a addict. And the family had been looking for this girl for like 2 weeks, but she was in New York, upstate New York. And the same thing. Well, the chances of this working, because they don't even know where the girl's at. And I said, but the mom said, "You know what? I'm going to do everything I can." And so she pulled out all the stops, and she brought me up there, and I went and talked to her for quite a while. And I got all the names of people that were, where she was going. And there was one particular little pizza shop where some of the friends worked. I didn't know anything. I just kind of knew, but I went to the pizza shop. I literally sat in there for about 3.5 hours. I was looking for one kid that was a friend of the boyfriend, and I was just listening. And I was sitting there eating pizza, very slowly, reading the paper on my phone. And finally, this guy, a regular customer, walks in, and he said, "Hey, Dylan," or I forget the kid's name. "Hey, how you doing? Glad to see you." And I'm like, that's the kid right there. So I'm watching him. So I waited until afterwards. And the kid was the manager of the store. But apparently these kids had been in a car, and they got pulled over by the police, and there was a gun and drugs involved. And this kid was in the car with the girl and her boyfriend. And so I waited out. So I sat out in my car and I waited, but it's another 2 hours for the kid to get off work. And I caught him walking out to his car. And I said, hey, and again, I'm using Dylan as a fictitious name. But I said, hey, Dylan, I said, you remember me? Because he's the one, because I wouldn't ask him. I said, hey, man, tell me what's the best thing on the menu. And we got, had a conversation about that. Oh, yeah, this is what I like. And he gave me the whole rundown, and it was very helpful. And you could tell he's a pretty good kid. But I said, hey, man, you remember me? I'm the guy that, had the pizza earlier. Yeah, I remember. What'd you think? I said, yeah, it was really good. Great recommendation. I really liked it. He said, I got a question. So then I started asking him about the girl and her boyfriend. And you could tell, I could see the reaction on his face. I said, okay. I said, look, man, and I look like a cop. And so look, man, I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble, but the family is very concerned for this girl's well-being. I said, it would be in everybody's best interest if this girl was to surface and be able to talk to her mother. I said, no trouble, none of that. I said, but, apparently there was this incident last Thursday where some kids got pulled over in the car, and there was a gun involved. The cop, there was a report written, and there was a kid named Dylan. And wait a minute, is that, was that you? That wasn't you, was it? You seem like too good. You wouldn't be involved in anything like that. But you could tell that. Anyway, that I was onto something. And so I got back in the car, and about 30 minutes later, the mom calls me and says, well, you've got it. You did something, because we now know where she's at, and we know what house she's in. And, so we found out exactly where the girl was. I said, okay, good. So I went and sat, I'm parked in front. I'm like, how am I going to do this? It was early the next morning. She's in this house with the boyfriend, and the boyfriend, the grandmother literally had went over there and tried to get the girl to leave with her. And the boyfriend, because once we found out, I said, go have the grandmother go over there and say, hey, we want you to come visit. I want to see you. Surely the boyfriend would let her leave with her grandmother. Well, the boyfriend wouldn't. He literally kept his arms around. No, you're not taking her. The girl wouldn't leave, and so the grandmother had to leave. And and the mother was even there, the boyfriend's mother. And so I'm like, how the heck am I? So I went and talked to the girl's brother or uncle. And he was kind of a character that was connected to people. He said, give me till the next morning. This boyfriend's not going to be a problem. And I didn't want to ask how that was going to happen. So I'm like, but obviously we don't want to be getting anybody in trouble. He said, yeah, don't worry about any of that. Just the boyfriend. Well, so I'm waiting outside of the house, and I'm thinking, man, I don't know how the heck this is going to happen. But I saw them walk. I drove by, and I saw two kids on the side of the street, and it was the girl and her boyfriend. And I drive by, snapped a picture. I'm driving by, and I sent it to the mom. I said, is this her? She said, yes, that's her, and that's him. And I said, okay. So I'm watching them, and they literally made a drug deal. They made a drug deal as I was sitting there watching them, and they went into this house. And so I called 911. The police showed up, and but by the time the deal had already been made, and they were walking back to their house. So we ended up getting. This is a long story, but we got the kid ended up getting arrested before he made it back to the house. So then the grandmother was able to go back over there, get the girl. We took her about 20 miles away, did the intervention, drove all night across the state of New York, got to Philadelphia. I think we got a morning flight out, and ended up getting her into rehab. But it was one of those things that we don't know how we're going to do this, but we just had the intention of getting it done. And the girl's actually, I think she's about to graduate college now. So.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. You're like a private investigator. I think there should be a reality show based on what you do, Bobby.
Well, that was a long story, but it's one of those hopeless situations. You have no idea how am I going to do this, but yet we decided we're going to go in, and we figured it out. It worked out positively. So
right, but then you also do interventions that might actually be like with the family when the addict is not necessarily on the streets, but still living at home or still living close by, and just really basically, how do you do an intervention like that?
Well, that's the majority of the interventions are exactly that. Their family's been living right there, and so we basically, there's basically 5 stages. There's the planning, preparation, execution, and you always hope and pray for the best, but you prepare for the worst. You prepare for the person to say no. What are the consequences? They ask me, what are you going to do if the person says no? And I say that, well, it all depends on what you are going to do, because this behavior, this dynamic is what they call, there's a term called familial homeostasis. What that means is family, and homeostasis means desire to stay the same, remain unchanging. So the family has to be willing to change their way they're doing things. And so I asked them, what are you willing to do? Are you willing to stop enabling? There's always an enabler. Every fire needs oxygen, and every addict needs an enabler. So they're getting the support from somewhere. Typically, once we can change that dynamic of how that relationship happens, then we can go in and we can effectively change the whole situation simply. And I just thought of another situation of a family in Northern California. Same thing. The guy was 30 years old, living at home with his mother. You walk into his bedroom, literally syringes all over the floor. You couldn't take a step without stepping on a syringe. He had abscesses from his knees down to his ankles, living there with his mother. So I've spent a lot of time with the mother going, look, we got to confront this. Your son's going to die. There's not a question, and like you mentioned earlier, the physical complications of that, a lot of the friends that I had, they're dead. I mean, there's probably over a dozen friends of mine that would always kind of make fun of me for getting in trouble, but which is what led me to the point of getting help. But they didn't get in trouble, but they're dead now because of liver failure, heart failure, sepsis, all kinds of things. Right. So, yep. But anyway, we got the kid's agreement to go. We sat down with him and spent a couple of days getting his agreement to go. But but he finally impinged. Number one, we could offer him some hope of a way out, and two, that the mother was done. So she finally said, look, we're done, and we're done with this. I'm not going to continue this anymore. And that was where, so we had two things there that helped us with that. So anyway, I hope that.
No, it's totally what I was looking for. And I think, you make the very good point. It's like, it's not so much what you, the interventionist, is going to do if the guy says no, but it's how is the family and the loved ones, how are they going to change what they've been doing? Because obviously doing the same thing that they've been doing the whole while this person's addicted has not worked.
Right.
So I can totally, it's just a good answer. I so admire you for you kind of go into the lion's den in many ways, Yeah. And then you put together an actual course on your website that people can buy. Have people been using it? Has it been successful?
The success rate for that, people doing that course, I mean, it's things that people go over. I mean, it's kind of standard operating procedure for an interventionist, these things, because I worked with many interventionists before I became one. And I've also collaborated with lots of other people, but this is people kind of find their own way of doing things that works. But the better, I would have to, the people ask me, what's the hardest part about an intervention? I said, getting the family prepared and ready to operate on the same page as a unit is the hardest part. Once I do that, the likelihood of getting that person help is, so I put the course together as a means of, number one is from a financial aspect, if the person is not able to absorb the expenses of an intervention, because not only do you have to pay there's the fees and also the expenses of the interventionist to arrive and getting the person treatment. So, this was an inexpensive option to be basically understand. And then it's also an indicator for me is because this problem is hard enough to confront. Mm-hmm. I have to get, if the family, a lot of times are not able to confront the information that they need to have to solve the problem. So that indicates to me how much work do I need to put into this? And it makes my job easier. But for the families that have done this course and we go do the intervention, it's almost like they go in, they know what to do now. They have certainty on what they're doing. So once they have that certainty, it takes a lot of the questions out. And they could move forward, and a lot of times they'll put together we could do it like this, or this is how we can do. And they'll tell me, they'll remind me of what's in the videos. They'll say, oh yeah, you said this, you said that. Right. Thanks for reminding me.
And Bobby, I got to say, not everybody who has a very successful modality such as yours, not everybody's willing to share. And I know that you charge for the course, but I also know you don't charge very much for the course.
Right.
And the fact that you're willing to take your expertise and put it out there so that someone could potentially, do their own intervention. I think I think it's very commendable. I really do.
Thank you for that. Again, it says to me, people talk about, about money. And I'm like, well, if I were to just in it to make money, there's lots of other things that I could do. This pick one of the hardest professions there is. Make it all about the money. No, there's lots of other things I could do. So
yeah, that makes sense. Bobby, before we did the interview today, you told us a little bit about some of your plans for the future, which I think are very exciting. Can you kind of give us a little preview of what's coming down the line?
Well, I did want to talk about my book that I have. It's on my website. It's called The Secrets to Successful Recovery. And it talks about the different things that the barriers that a person needs to overcome to achieve recovery. If you want to learn about what those barriers are and how to overcome them, or the idea of how to overcome them, they're in this book. Also, the do's and don'ts of how to interact with somebody when they're in treatment, what to do upon completing treatment. There's 10 steps in here that actually are not. I don't want to confuse that with the 12 steps or anything, but there's 10 things in here that a person does. If they can do these things, then they're going to greatly increase their chances of recovery. And the truth is that if they can't do those 10 things, these are based off of not only addiction, but also anybody that's successful in life, in business or anything. They pretty much do these things. They surround themselves with positive people, good, smart people. They're ethical. They show up early. They go the extra mile. They contribute to their communities. They do. Successful people do those things anyway. And so it's listed out. And I went to an entrepreneur convention a few years ago, and I was listening to everybody. And I was like, wow. I mean, these guys are all, regardless of where they had all different backgrounds of where they came from. And this would be perfect if an addict could do these things. They would empower themselves to the point of, overcoming their obstacles that they're having in life. So I put together this book. It's $14.95 on Amazon, $14.99 or $14.95 on Amazon. It's about 68 pages or something. It's very easy. I'm very excited about this book, as well as I have some friends that I've collaborated with that we've put together a life coaching or sober coaching program, where we reach out to churches and community groups, and we do basically Zoom virtual meetings or seminars over talking about the barriers to overcoming addiction. And then from that, we've now developed a life coaching, sober coaching program curriculum to where we can help people coming out of rehab have a connection with people and put together an individualized program based on their needs to help them maintain sobriety. So it's very exciting.
Wow. Now, if someone wants information on that and or just information on you, can they get information on that program at newmaninterventions.com or?
Newmaninterventions.com. They can call the number, they can go to the website, fill out the form, and we will definitely get them in contact. I mean, I could tell you more about it. There is a particular website, angellifecoaches.org. And we would direct them and get a lot of this stuff is being developed, but it's in the works. I mean, I have a person now that I'm working with to start sober coaching the person. So we have the curriculum developed, but promotional pieces and all that are going to be forthcoming very quickly. So
so there's newmaninterventions.com if you need the intervention, and then there's angellifecoaching.com. And that is for how to stay sober, basically.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Bobby, I cannot thank you enough for being on the podcast today. Before I let you go, if you could just give one message to the people listening who have a loved one who's addicted, what would that message be?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that, if you can, 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 if I don't know. It's a very long message.
That's okay. I didn't say it had to be short.
It's never, it's never too soon to do an intervention. It's always too late. Right. So it's never too soon. I don't know how bad the addiction is. Oh, okay. Well, why do we want to wait till that? Let's stop the behavior now. Let's get this person on the right track. This person truly wants help. They don't want to go down this path. Let's help them, so that's let's get this handled. And so we can all enjoy the rest of our lives. So.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bobby, for taking the time to talk to us today.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So Bobby Newman, successful interventionist. What are we going to talk about on your interview next week?
We're going to talk about the need to do an intervention and why a person should go ahead and seriously consider and do an intervention, because it's never too soon to do an intervention. It's always too late. People wait till the tragedy happens, the overdose, the car accident, the legal problems, the mounting. And a lot of times these mount and keep going. They pay about tens of thousands in attorney fees. Let's do the intervention. Let's stop all that. Let's avoid that. Let's put all our efforts to stopping the madness and getting this person help. I have 25 tips to a successful intervention that I send out to people. I also have an intervention course that I send to people that help them learn how to do an intervention. So that's what we're going to talk about on the podcast.
I hope you enjoyed the interview with Bobby Newman. I think that some very good points were made. I think you don't want to wait until you find out how bad it is before you hire someone like Bobby to do an intervention with your loved one. I want to give you Bobby's 800 number so you can call him. It is 866-989-4499. I also want to let you know that he has a free downloadable PDF called 25 Tips to Successful Intervention that you might want to get from him, because if you need to do an intervention, this is going to help you get ready for it and set up for it. And you can find that by going to newmaninterventions.com. Reach out to Bobby and he'll send it to you. We will talk to you again next week.
You have been listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information, reach out to us on Facebook or go to www.theaddictionpodcast.com. Our email is theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com.